Welcome to Subscription Prescription, the podcast where you get the information you need to scale your subscription program. With BFCM right around the corner, you're getting all your campaigns, product pages, and offers put together. I know that content is a huge need for your business. So I'd like to highlight our sponsor for this episode, Penmo. Penmo is an app you can install on your Shopify store to access all kinds of content resources. And unlike AI tools that you're hearing about left and right, Penmo is actually a real writing service that just uses AI to match you with the right writer for your needs. So if you're developing emails for those campaigns, product page descriptions, landing pages, you name it, Penmo can help scale your content ability very, very quickly. Almost all of their projects, you can get a first revision or draft turned around in 4 to 5 days at the most. Highly recommend checking out Penmo in the App Store, and you can use code MATT20 to get 20% off your first month. Hello and welcome to another dose of Subscription Prescription, the podcast where we try to help you figure out everything related to D2C subscriptions. I'm your host, Matthew Holman, and I'm thrilled this week to be joined by Al Salomon, an experienced retention and lifecycle marketer and a good friend of mine. Al, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Okay, Al, you've worked at Dime Beauty, Wuffes, a lot of other companies. You're an experienced retention marketer. I would love for you to just start by introducing yourselves to our listeners and readers a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I'm Al. I've worked in the retention space for the majority of my career. I actually like to joke and say that it was totally accidental. I went to school for English, and I hesitate sharing that because a lot of people look at me and they're like, you went to school for what and why? Did you not have anything else to major in? Which is kind of true, but English majors also make a great undergrad degree for law school, and that was actually the plan.
Okay.
But English majors also are great copywriters,
They are.
and one thing led to another, and I ended up in email marketing. Once you're in email marketing, I feel like it's really hard to step away, which that is, for the most part, a lot of what we do as retention marketers. But yeah, I've done lifecycle marketing, CRM, subscriptions, loyalty for many, many different brands that are, as small as $2 million a year to $100 million a year companies as well. So everywhere and anywhere in between.
That's fantastic. Now, for a little while, I was a comparative literature major because of the very same reason. I got to, be very nerdy about books and also potentially pre-law. But that didn't happen, thankfully. But anyway, so definitely can relate to that. Maybe there's a little bit of a trend of people that like studying like English or reading books or just being smarter than their friends that want to go into subscriptions and retention.
Yeah. Well, we're still pretty good writers, even with ChatGPT.
That is true. That is true. Okay, so I would love to start because for me, as somebody who's worked in the space for a number of years, lifecycle marketing, like as a term, felt a little cryptic up until recently. Like full disclosure, obviously retention, I know a ton about. So I would love for you to explain to everybody, just break down what goes into lifecycle marketing, retention marketing within a typical e-com brand.
Yeah. So that's a great question because I feel like we're still trying to discover the definition of retention marketers, especially with the increase of brands wanting to be subscription brands. Historically, retention marketers were just CRM. So email, SMS, and the reason for that is because those have been our main channels of communication. So push notifications as well. Any part of the customer journey that touches the customer has historically fallen under retention, which is why, when you ask a retention marketer, what do you do? It varies. We have retention marketers that manage loyalty programs. We have retention marketers that oversee entire CS orgs as well, CS departments, because when you think
CS, customer support, right?
Yeah, customer support, which is a good point because there's CS, which refers to customer support, and then we have CX, which refers to customer experience. Right. And if you ask me as a retention marketer, like, what is retention? How do you define retention? For me, it is the entire customer experience, which it's a lot.
Would you say that starts at like the point of purchase, like somebody buys something and then retention marketing takes over at that point, or how do you view it? I mean,
for sure,
we can get into the theory of like it starts before that, yes, but I mean, it typically from a like job to do standpoint, purchase is made, retention marketing takes over.
I think that's kind of part of the problem because like on paper, retention marketers are hired to take over past the initial purchase. But when you consider retention and customer experience, it touches even pre-purchase,
Right.
their experience on that landing page, the experience on that PDP. But if you think about it, that typically lives with growth or CRO specialists. And that's one of the biggest disconnects we're seeing today with retention marketers and subscriptions in general.
Okay, let's put a pin on that because actually that's one of the topics I wanted to dive
sure.
into with you. But before we get there, like when you're defining the different aspects of lifecycle marketing, retention marketing, I'm assuming that changes as companies scale up in size, right? So, like if you're small, you have one person who's owning all of those things. You get larger, there are individual roles maybe allocated to that. How does that kind of work? What works well with that
hmm
system and works poorly with those systems as you scale and add people?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've worked in marketing teams with 20 plus people, and retention teams are no larger than two.
Okay.
And I've worked, as a single retention marketer, and we're a team of one. So our teams, for the most part, we don't have a ton of resources. We don't have a ton of team members. Typically, you have a director, an associate director, and then you have a coordinator or a manager underneath. We do work alongside copywriters and graphic designers, but it is a lot. Like I said, I worked at a team. We had 20 plus marketing team members, multiple social media managers, multiple graphic designers, content managers. But when it came to retention, we had two people. And I think part of that is retention is just so misunderstood. A lot of teams, a lot of brands, a lot of people think it's someone sending an email, it's someone sending a text. Like, why do they need more than two people?
That's so interesting. So yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask is why do you think that is? And I mean, I guess it's because like a bigger brand probably has maybe an email agency that they work with that might manage some of that as well. But is it like loyalty is like you turn on a switch and it like works? Like is that where like some of the assumptions or maybe mistakes you think are being made on the retention side?
Yeah. So I think if you think about like the teams of one or two and why we're outsourcing a lot of email agencies to take over creative and even the technical setups of flows and automations, it's because strategy takes up a large portion of these roles, and typically strategy is put on the back burner. Because again, if you think of retention marketers and most of our job descriptions are comms, a lot of the things we're doing is just we're sending out campaigns, we're sending out, promotional content, and we're not focused on the long-term customer experience
Right.
portion of it. So when you consider a loyalty program, a lot of brands, they do set it up and they forget it and they don't go in and optimize it until it's broken or until you have your CEO knocking on your door like, how does our loyalty program work? And you explain points, but does that actually explain the
Right.
loyalty program?
Right. And does that actually drive revenue? Right. Is that
Exactly.
actually driving the behaviors you want from your customers? It's so interesting because I feel like when we're talking about the opportunity, like from a revenue standpoint, there's all these arguments around, the cost to acquire a customer, their lifetime value, like offsetting those ad costs or however you're acquiring them. And often in those models, we're baking in the numbers that we see from our expected retention, right? Like,
Right.
so if we're bringing in a cohort of 100 first-time buyers, a retention marketer is going to be telling that the revenue team or the CMO or whoever that is, hey, this is our expected like return rate, how often and how much they're going to purchase,
hmm
and then they're building that as part of their model. But then it sounds like you're saying like that's where the drop off point happens is somebody's reporting on what's happening, but there's not necessarily a ton of resources going after trying to improve that or make that better.
Yeah. I think also it goes back to the disconnect between retention marketers and growth marketers because sometimes you think, okay, we have an 80% retention rate. That's what we're going to count on. But where is that, original audience coming from?
Hmm.
If you compare retention rates for customers that come from, let's say, an influencer for your brand versus organic or a paid ad, like those cohorts are going to have really different retention rates. And part of the reason is you have to ask yourself, is that customer loyal to that influencer that they purchased the product
Right.
from? Was it the ad that was it like a price thing? So sometimes that's where the disconnect happens and those conversations aren't happening. And then we scramble more emails, more texts. Let's do more sales more often because we didn't understand who that group was coming in from the very beginning.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And something like I promise for anybody listening, I did not prep her with what to say here because it's the same thing that I harp on all the time. It's like understand like acquisition heavily influences retention, right?
For sure.
Product heavily influences retention. So what would you say is like your ideal like retention strategy? Like if you were to build a program or department from the ground up, I should say a company, the marketing side of a company from the ground up, how would growth and retention be playing together, you think, in an ideal circumstance or ideal world?
Yeah. And I think, you know, some brands, some companies, they are doing this today because they've figured out the gap between growth and retention. It's kind of like the traditional marketing and sales at a tech company.
Right,
You know,
right,
they
right.
don't always get along. Marketing wants to sell a story, sales wants to sell a product or, you know, whatever they have to do to get the deal done.
Mhm.
I think in a perfect situation, growth and retention, they're either on the same team or they work super closely together. Like, there, you know, retention should know exactly what growth is doing and vice versa. I often talk to growth marketers and I have no idea what they're saying.
Right,
And that's a problem.
right.
And I think they feel the same way about us sometimes where we're, you know, we're bringing the red flags to the conversations, but we shouldn't have to do it after the fact. Like we should be working as a team collectively from the very beginning to understand the entire customer life cycle. And I know you asked like how I would set it up if in a perfect situation, but that's why retention marketers are becoming much more involved with CS teams. And that's why you're hearing the term CX, customer experience, being thrown out more because retention marketers, I'm doing this today, we're going to our CS teams and we're asking them, what problems are customers having?
Right.
What are they emailing in about? Like, please give me as much information as you have. And when you think about customer experience and retention, that's what you have to do with every group in your org. You have to talk to them, you have to let them know what you're doing, and then vice versa, you need to understand what they're doing.
Yeah, a recent example I have is a brand I talked to just the other day was saying, "Hey, we've set up this really, really great gift with on month 2 of their subscription program, and it was so good." I said, "Well, your product page just says you get gifts on the
Mm,
subscription," and I said, "Everybody says that. Everybody says you get gifts and points and stuff. I don't think that moves the needle for anybody. I would literally put month 2, you're going to get this on the
exactly.
product page." And
Yeah.
the guy looked at me like that's the craziest thing he's ever heard, and I
Mm,
like, no, if you have something really great coming down the pipeline, why wouldn't you put that as part of your growth package,
right.
right?
Unless they don't think it's going to work, right? And then you
Sure,
have to go back
sure.
to the table and decide, okay, let's just try something else. But I actually had a different experience where I was working with a brand and the retention team, they were sending out like a free gift on order 3. And then the CS team was randomly throwing in gifts on order number 2 and nobody knew why. And like it was like an accidental discovery, but you know, the CS team, they weren't equipped with tagging, with processes to understand how that would affect retention. You know, they were working off a Google sheet, putting
Right.
in, I gave this customer a free bottle of supplements on order 2. I'll check in, you know, no, that's
Right.
not
Right.
going to
Right.
work.
Right.
But we understand where that's coming from and the root of wanting to send a free gift to a customer. But you know, that shows even more why you need to talk with your teams and departments and understand why and how you're doing something because the retention team, you know, they had resources that they could have allocated to the CS team to help them track the progress of that initiative.
What are some of the ways, and feel free to start with obvious ways that
Hmm.
retention is influencing revenue. So I know with like, you're sending email campaigns or you're setting up flows, that type of things. But I'd be curious. So unpack that a little bit, some of those strategies that work. And then my follow-up question will be, how is that potentially other ways they're influencing revenue, like influencing growth strategies and other things that you've seen work?
Yeah. So I think for the most part, retention, you know, we're setting the fundamentals for long term. We're not thinking just let's send a campaign next week, let's push a 50% off promo. We're thinking, what does the customer experience look like today? What do we want it to look like in 3 to 6 months? Is it broken? What resources are we missing? You know, part of someone in a retention role, something you should do at all times is test, 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 see what parts of the customer experience are broken, see what can be improved. That's why we're, you know, fanatics of quizzes, fanatics of surveys. Like we want to understand the customer journey.
Hmm.
And the thing is, we think we do, but we don't.
Right. Right.
And
There's
that's the
always a
truth.
huge gap in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot your second question.
Oh, the second question is like other ways. So actually, you start talking about that, like quizzes, right?
Yeah.
Like that's technically a growth strategy. So how have you seen like quizzes or other things like? I've got some ideas of this too, but when you take something that you see working on retention and you go to the growth team in this ideal scenario and say, "Hey, we're seeing this work on the retention side. Why don't we use that on the growth side?" Like thinking through other ways that retention can positively influence revenue or growth.
For sure. I'm going to start with a story because I actually used to be like anti-surveys. I'm like, nobody wants to take surveys. Like, I won't take a survey. But I just came back from a trip with my dad, and he voluntarily took a survey over the phone for 5 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
He didn't even know who was calling, and he had them on speakerphone. And I listened to the entire thing. And I'm like, Dad, you're the easiest person to scam because you just gave them all of our personal information.
Right.
But it just goes to show like people are willing, especially people who are willing to improve their experiences with brands.
Right.
They're willing to share information. So I think on the retention side, because it's not black and white for any business, we're constantly wanting to gather more insights, more data to understand who are the customers walking in the door and who are the customers staying, because I think there's a difference there too.
Big time.
And that's information that you can take back to your growth team or your CS team or even your product team. Like, you guys are developing this product for, customer X, Y, and Z, but those aren't our customers. And understanding that your customers, again, they are willing to give you the right data. And in terms of going back to traditional life cycle, we've talked about segmentation for years. 5 years ago, that might have been, segmenting who's been engaged last 30, 60, 90 days.
What product did they buy?
What
Something
product
simple
did
like
they
that.
buy? Today, that's not what we're talking about, segmentation. We're talking about what product did you buy and where did you put it in your home? Or where do you live in terms of location? So we're not sending you things that are totally irrelevant.
Weren't you talking about the ability to like segment people in Klaviyo based off of review, like
Yes.
things they did in a review? Put in a review?
Yes.
Okay.
So in your review form, if you ask them, okay, you bought this product, where in your home are you using it? Let's say it's like a scent product for you want pumpkin scents in your kitchen. It's good to understand where they bought that product so that you can show them emails or texts of, did you know you could also use this product in your bathroom? Or if you tell me you have dogs, this is the product I'm going to recommend.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're talking about, segmentation in today's day.
Yeah, and I think the example I harp on all the time is, say, like protein powder, because protein powder is commonly bought for 3 very, very different reasons, right? People are either using it as a meal supplement, they're trying to like lose weight, they're gaining or bulking, they're trying to work out and put on muscles, or they're like an endurance athlete, and if they don't get enough protein in, like their muscles are going to crumble. Well, those 3 different people could have totally different campaigns, flows, bundle offers, all types of things. So like that kind of segmentation is really, really important, especially on a subscription. And when we start to look at like LTV numbers, we could start to unpack like, hey, this use case, people that put this in their bathroom actually are retained twice as much as people that put it in their bedroom. So we should, hey, growth team, we need to go after more people. We need to test more ads and copy related to putting this in your bathroom, because people that do that, we know, are going to stick around with us longer than those that don't.
Yeah. And going back to the crossover between growth and retention, and you talk about KPIs and metrics to measure, a lot of the metrics that growth teams should overlap, 3-6 month period to understand the customer I brought in, are they sticking around past the initial purchase? And you talk to your retention team, you understand why or why not. And you can go back to quiz data. Well, this customer bought the product for the wrong reason. It was a price reason. They thought it was a good deal. So let's not go after customer A anymore. But customer B, they bought it for this reason and they're going to stick along longer. So let's go after customer B.
What's your like North Star metric for a lot of that? Is it contribution margin? Is it 90-day LTV? Like, how do you think about that when you're like, again, how a growth team, what number they should be looking at, what the retention, what essentially the business owner should be looking at for a North Star metric?
Yeah. I think like in simple terms, LTV, because when you look at contribution margin, there's other factors to consider. A lot of retention marketers, we will have contribution margin KPIs, but we won't consider CAC because that's kind of out of our hands. So that's why like a simple metric like LTV can be used for both growth and retention. And it's not overly complicated. You don't have to calculate a ton. It's easily accomplished through retaining, but
and I guess should we say lifetime revenue? I know there's a lot of people in the D2C Twitterverse that are getting mad about people are using LTV incorrectly, because technically lifetime value is lifetime revenue minus cost to come but anyway. So so the revenue that somebody is basically contributing to the business. You like to, because you mentioned time bound. Do you like to have that time bound so that it has a little bit more meaning or impact?
It's going to depend for
Right.
each business, right? Because I work with a brand right now where the customers are coming back every 90 to 180 days. So
Okay.
you won't have like 30, 60, 90 for them. You might have other KPIs and initiatives where you want them to come back sooner, maybe
Mhm.
for a cross sell, upsell, and that's a different story. But it's going to depend by brand for sure.
Do you think that when you're doing something like that, is it so let's say the typical repurchase is at 180 days. Like what are some other touch points that you think would strengthen that lifetime revenue of that customer? Or I guess that's what I'm asking. Is lifetime revenue the only way to think about that? Because if I can get somebody to purchase at 175 days versus 180, obviously that's better for my business,
For
better for
sure.
cash flow. But what if there's a different action I can take that keeps them buying at 180, but maybe they buy more, or maybe the second time the second or third, like they stick around longer over time? Like how
For
do you,
sure.
is that where that strategy piece of retention marketing comes into, do you think? Or
Yeah, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is directional data. So whatever we can do to increase revenue, does that mean, we're asking them to refer a friend
okay.
and get them to purchase a different product or an additional product? Like if it's a subscription brand, are we asking them to gift a subscription for a year, which is a very generous gift, but it
Right.
could happen for the right client and brand?
Right. What do you think about loyalty? Like typical loyalty programs, points, all that stuff?
Well, I love loyalty.
Okay. Right.
I'm at Chick-fil-A every other day because they have the best loyalty program. I think loyalty is becoming repetitive in
Right.
in terms of we're seeing the same templates, we're seeing the same thing, and yet everybody's trying to reinvent the wheel
Right.
with cashback, with points, with credit systems. It's just, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. Just make sure that's not complicated for your customers. Because if
Okay.
your internal team doesn't get it, your customers will definitely not get it. And I think, being part of those larger companies, we're always wanting, and even the smaller companies, we're always looking for the best next thing.
Right.
And sometimes the best next thing might complicate your customer experience. So just keep that in mind.
So it's like, I think too, when I'm hearing some of the other things you're saying is like when it comes to loyalty, like, because I always, if somebody asked me within subscriptions, like, should we have a loyalty program or not? I'm like, okay, well, what is it gonna be? Because if
Right.
you're just gonna do a point system, like, I have nothing to tell you
Sure.
because that's what everybody else does. Like, fine, go ahead. But if you're thinking like, oh, we want to do gift with purchase, or a third order is going to be free, like some of these other, like you start to get a little more sophisticated, then it's like, oh, okay, now we're
hmm
actually trying to think like strategically
For
about
sure.
loyalty. Like again, on a subscription basis, if I know that like month 4 is typically my safe zone,
hmm
then I'm worried about what people are doing in month 1, 2, and
Yeah.
3. And then the other side of that is, so month 1, 2, and 3, I'm worried about people leaving.
hmm
But after month 4, I'm trying to reward them in a way that creates stronger brand loyalty, identity, referrals, maybe increase their AOV, that kind of thing. So it's like totally different tactics that I might be using from a
Yeah.
loyalty perspective before or after that touch point.
No, I mean, if you're going to set up a loyalty program just to give out points, like just don't set it up.
Right.
It should be with initiatives similar to subscriptions or repeat purchases. Like, I want a customer to purchase on order number 2. Or, I have customers that have spent $10,000 with me. Like, I want to reward them so that there's not a reason for them to go somewhere else.
Right.
Because if you don't give them a reason to stay, you're giving them more reasons to leave.
I like that.
And so that's how I look at loyalty. And when when I have a brand and they're like, I want to do loyalty, I'm like, why? What are the goals? What are the expectations? And what are the outcomes too, I guess. And so you treat it like subscriptions. Like, do you want to get the customer to the third order? Is there a really nice prize on order number 3? Or, you want to reward customers for being around for a year, because you definitely should. You don't know if they'll stick around after a
Right.
year. So that's where your mind should be if you want to launch loyalty.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
hmm
Okay. Al, so as you're talking about like everybody's always trying to like the next best thing, they're trying to reinvent the wheel, I
Sure.
guess. Like it made me think of email in the sense of like for years people have been saying email is dead. Like, and I know that in-app, like creating an app, push notifications, SMS, there's a lot of other ways to communicate with people. But I just wonder if like how do you see then the best strategy with when we're thinking about trying to go from, instead of looking for the next best thing, what should somebody be doing instead of trying to chase the next best tech or the next best offer type?
Sure.
Like what is the right approach from a strategic level of thinking for a brand as that they're thinking about retention and loyalty and all these pieces?
Yeah. And I'm not saying like we shouldn't look
Sure,
for
of
the
course,
next
of
best
course.
thing, because I've seen crazy progress in email even this year
Right.
with tons of
Right. I'm just saying
software.
I've heard
Yeah,
email is dead for like 10
sure.
years
It's,
now,
it
and
never
it's not,
was.
it never was and never is, and it maybe never will be. But so that's kind of just more of like, okay, yes, there are new, well, and actually this could be a framework, maybe, or an idea of how you would
Yeah.
evaluate new tech, right? So from a strategy level, like if we're going back to the drawing board, thinking about how should I approach retention, what do you think is a great way or mindset that a brand should be having when they're thinking about it like that?
So I treat every brand the same way. Start with your fundamentals. Like before you want to add a new tool for email or a new cashback program or loyalty program, start with your fundamentals. A lot of brands think they have everything in place, but they don't.
Okay.
Either something's broken, something's outdated. You could be
So what are examples of fundamentals then?
So I think we look at like fundamental flows for the most part,
Okay.
but we set them up 5 years ago. We never touch
Okay.
them again.
Right.
Like the copy isn't updated, or I know it's like silly to say, but you might have a broken link or a link that sends customers to a blog that's no longer relevant, or
Okay.
you have customers dropping off because you're not educating them enough. And so we're sending them so many campaigns about promotional,
There could be a random email in
periods.
a flow that's getting ridiculously high click rates that nobody's paying attention to and like trying
Exactly.
to optimize or figure out how to make more revenue from
Yeah.
something that's working. Okay. Yeah,
And also, working on the brand side historically and for the majority of my career, we are guilty of putting like the CX mapping in the back burner because we
Mhm.
don't have the time. We're
Right.
too busy launching a new product. We're too busy configuring a new loyalty program that we don't actually go through the process of placing a test order, of letting it ship, of looking at all the contact points. So there is something there that's broken. There is something there that's missing that isn't optimized.
Mm.
You should be looking at your traditional flows and your fundamentals of your brand more recent than you think. You don't
Okay.
do it once a year. You do it more than that.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I was going to say my final question is like, what strategy tips or tricks would you recommend? But so I would say let's start with focus on the fundamentals, review all your existing flows and what you've been sending to see what either is broken or what is working that could be better. Is there anything that is new or interesting that you're seeing out there inside the retention game that you think is pretty fascinating or cool that people should be paying attention to?
I think it's an extension of what we've been doing, but now we just have so many more resources, so much more tech that makes it easier for us. Um, I don't know that I'll shout out a single one right now because I'm a tough critic,
Okay.
but
I know you can't be. That's good. That's fine.
but I do love what's coming out. Like just on LinkedIn, I saw this week that now there's a tool that will, if you have products in retail stores, you can send an email and you'll
Yes.
touch the tool or you click on the tool and it will show you exactly where that product is. I think that's genius.
Right.
Because yes, I shop everything online, but I do love a Target run
Right.
weekly.
Right.
So that would be so helpful because I also, I'm not going to ask someone where something is. And if it's not there, I'm walking right out. So that tool is incredible. And so those are the things that will make big waves, especially
Right.
for omni-channel, for brands that are in retail, that are online. Those are the things that I look at and, would recommend.
That's what I love. I mean, for me, it is like what are easier, like creating better touch points,
Mhm.
like allowing you to communicate a little bit differently. Like the digital wallet passes, I think are really
Yes.
interesting, right? Like, you can do a refer a friend right from your phone, or you can get a
Mhm.
push notification from your wallet without having to download an app. So there's so many different things that are happening to kind of enable that, especially across multi-channel. Well,
For sure.
Al, thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming on the show.
thank you.
I highly recommend anybody listening to this to go check out her LinkedIn because she's regularly posting content about retention and stuff. And we'll have some more exciting stuff to come in the future as well, working with Al. So thanks for coming.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It was a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's it for this week's dose. Please stay tuned to next week for another dose of subscription prescription. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe so that you can get notified when new episodes come out each week on Tuesdays.